Have you ever wondered how one person's faithfulness could shape the entire course of human history? Today we dive deep into the story of Seth, the chosen seed, a narrative that challenges everything you thought you knew about hope rising from tragedy. What makes this story extraordinary? While many know about Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, few understand the profound significance of Seth, the appointed one who became the bridge between humanity's fall and its redemption. This isn't just another biblical story, it's a masterpiece of divine purpose that resonates with our modern struggles. In preparing this analysis, I've spent countless hours studying ancient Hebrew texts, cross-referencing theological commentaries from renowned scholars, and examining historical documents that span thousands of years. This comprehensive research has unveiled remarkable insights about Seth's life that many traditional teachings have overlooked. Drawing from both the Dead Sea Scrolls and contemporary archaeological findings, we've pieced together a narrative that's both historically accurate and spiritually profound. By the end of this video, you'll gain a deep understanding of how one person's faithfulness can impact generations. Practical wisdom for maintaining your faith in a challenging world. Insights into building a lasting spiritual legacy in your own family. A fresh perspective on God's redemptive plan through human history. Actionable strategies for leading with purpose in times of moral decline. Stay with me as we uncover how Seth's appointment after tragedy became the cornerstone of hope for all humanity. His story isn't just history, it's a blueprint for those seeking to make a lasting impact in their own generation. Part 1. The Weight of Legacy. In the haunting silence of a world forever changed, the weight of history's first murder hung heavy in the air. Picture, if you will, the land outside Eden's sealed gates, a landscape scarred not just by thorns and thistles, but now by the dark stain of brothers' blood upon the ground. Here, amid the ruins of humanity's first family tragedy, our story of hope begins. Adam and Eve's world had shattered not once but twice. First came the fall from paradise, the loss of perfect communion with God, the shame of their disobedience, the harsh reality of exile from Eden. But it was the second tragedy that threatened to break them completely. The murder of Abel at Cain's hands wasn't just the loss of a son, it was the death of their hope, the corruption of everything they had tried to rebuild outside Eden's gates. Biblical scholars point to Genesis 4:10 and 11 as one of Scripture's most haunting passages. The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Imagine the weight of these words echoing through Adam and Eve's consciousness. Every time they worked the soil, they would have been reminded of their younger son's blood, crying out from beneath their feet. The emotional devastation was complete. Their firstborn son, Cain, once their pride and hope for the future, had become the world's first murderer. Now he wandered as a marked man building cities in the east, trying to escape the burden of his crime. Abel, their righteous son who had pleased God with his offerings, lay in the ground, the first human to experience death, not through natural causes, but through violence. But in this darkest moment, when all seemed lost, God's redemptive plan was already in motion. The birth of Seth came as divine appointment, a new beginning written in the tears of grieving parents. The name Seth itself, derived from the Hebrew word shatat, to place or appoint, carried profound significance. Eve's words at his birth reveal both her grief and her hope. For God has appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. Genesis 4:25. Imagine the atmosphere into which Seth was born, a household marked by both sorrow and desperate hope. His earliest memories would have been shaped by the stories his parents told, tales of a perfect garden they could never return to, of walking with God in the cool of the day, of the terrible choice that led to their exile, and of the brother he would never meet, whose blood still cried from the ground. As Seth grew, he witnessed a world rapidly dividing into two distinct paths. In the east, Cain's lineage was flourishing in worldly terms. The Bible records their achievements with almost clinical precision. Jabal became the father of those who dwell in tents and raise livestock, Jubal the father of musicians, and Tubal-Cain the first metalworker, Genesis 4 verses 20 through 22. They were building cities, creating culture, advancing technology, but doing it all apart from God. Meanwhile, Seth's upbringing was markedly different. From his father Adam, he learned not just how to work the cursed ground, but the deeper truths of who God was and what he had promised. Adam would have shared the prophecy of Genesis 3:15, the promise that one day the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head. This wasn't just family history for Seth, it was his inheritance, his calling, his destiny. The contrast between the two lineages grew starker with each passing generation. Cain's line reached its epitome in Lamech, who boasted of killing a young man for striking him and claimed a protection 77 times greater than Cain's, Genesis 4, 23 through 24. This was humanity spiraling further from God's ways, violence begetting violence, pride building upon pride. But through Seth, something remarkable was happening. Genesis 4:26 records a pivotal moment. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. This simple statement represents a spiritual revolution. While Cain's line was building monuments to human achievement, Seth's line was building altars of worship. They were preserving not just the memory of Eden, but the practice of true fellowship with God. The weight of this legacy shaped everything about Seth's life. He understood that he wasn't just living for himself, he was preserving truth for future generations. His line would eventually produce Enoch, who walked so closely with God that he was taken directly to heaven without experiencing death, Genesis 5:24. It would give rise to Noah, who would preserve humanity through the flood, and ultimately lead to Jesus Christ himself. Archaeological evidence from the ancient Near East reveals how unique this preservation of monotheistic faith was. While other cultures were developing complex pantheons of gods, Seth's line maintained the truth of one creator God. This wasn't just swimming against the cultural current, it was maintaining a completely different worldview in the face of mounting opposition. Seth's embrace of this weighty legacy would be tested in ways he could never have imagined. As the world around him grew increasingly corrupt, his commitment to preserving and passing on the truth would face challenges that would reveal exactly why God had chosen him as the vessel of hope for future generations. The way he navigated these challenges would not only validate his appointment, but also provide a blueprint for maintaining faith in a fallen world. Part 2. Building a Godly Heritage. Picture a world where darkness crept ever deeper into human hearts. The lush paradise of Eden was now a distant memory, replaced by thorns and thistles that spoke of humanity's fallen state. In this world of increasing moral decay, Seth stood as a beacon of hope, though the weight of his responsibility must have pressed heavily upon his shoulders. The scene unfolds in the shadows of growing civilizations. To the east, where Cain had established his domain, great cities were rising, monuments to human pride and achievement. The sound of metal workers' hammers rang through valleys where Tubal-Cain, Cain's descendant, forged instruments of bronze and iron. Music filled the air from Jubal's lyres and pipes, but these weren't songs of praise to the Creator. They were celebrations of human glory and independence. In stark contrast, Seth's household maintained a different rhythm of life. As the sun would set each evening, casting long shadows across the land, Seth would gather his family in what ancient texts describe as the assembly of the faithful. Picture the scene. Adam, his father, now well over 800 years old, his face lined with the wisdom and sorrow of one who had walked with God in paradise and lost it. His hands, calloused from years of tilling the cursed ground, would tremble slightly as he recounted stories of Eden's glory. Eve, Seth's mother, whose eyes still sparked with divine hope despite the loss of two sons, one to death and one to exile, would sit nearby, often adding details to Adam's accounts. Her voice would grow especially tender when speaking of the evening walks with God in the garden, and fierce with purpose when reminding them of the promise that her seed would one day crush the serpent's head. The Bible captures a pivotal moment in Genesis 4:26. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. This simple statement masks a revolution in human worship. Seth had recognized a critical need. While Cain's line built impressive cities and developed new technologies, they were rapidly forgetting the Creator. Seth understood that without intentional preservation, the knowledge of God could be lost within a single generation. Historical records and ancient Jewish commentaries suggest that Seth established what scholars now call the schools of Seth, regular gatherings where divine truth was preserved and passed down. These weren't mere storytelling sessions. They were carefully structured teachings that encompassed everything from creation's glory to the consequences of the fall, from the promise of redemption to the proper way to approach God in worship. The contrast between the two societies grew more pronounced with each passing year. Archaeological evidence from this period suggests two distinct cultural patterns. Cain's civilization was marked by rapid urbanization, technological advancement, and increasing violence. Lamech, Cain's descendant, even boasted of killing a young man for striking him, claiming his vengeance would be 77-fold, a chilling escalation of Cain's violence. Meanwhile, Seth's community maintained a simpler yet profound lifestyle. They were not anti-aggressive, but they understood that advancement without God would lead to destruction. They developed their own traditions, their own ways of marking time and remembering God's promises. Ancient texts speak of stone pillars where they recorded God's dealings with mankind, ensuring their children would have a written testimony of divine faithfulness. Perhaps the most dramatic challenge to Seth's heritage building came during what scholars call the Great Mixing. As his family line grew and prospered, the allure of Cain's more sophisticated civilization proved increasingly tempting to some of Seth's descendants. The cities to the east offered excitement, entertainment, and opportunities for advancement. Some of Seth's own grandchildren began to question the need for such strict separation. This crisis reached its peak when marriages between the two lines began to occur. Genesis 6 hints at this, speaking of the sons of God, widely understood to be Seth's line, intermarrying with the daughters of men, Cain's line. Seth faced a paramount challenge: how to preserve godly heritage without becoming legalistic, how to maintain purity while still showing love. His response revealed remarkable wisdom. Instead of simply forbidding contact with Cain's descendants, Seth deepened his family's understanding of their identity and purpose. He transformed their regular gatherings into powerful teaching moments, using every available opportunity to reinforce the importance of their calling. Consider one particularly moving scene, preserved in ancient traditions: Seth standing atop a hill with his teenage grandchildren, pointing first to the impressive cities in the distance, then to the night sky above. "Those towers," he would say, "will crumble to dust. But the God who hung those stars, He is eternal, and we are called to know Him." The effectiveness of Seth's leadership became evident in the remarkable individuals who emerged from his lineage. Enoch, his great-grandson, achieved such intimacy with God that Scripture records he walked with God. Then he was no more because God took him. Genesis 5:24. This supernatural departure from earth served as a powerful vindication of Seth's emphasis on spiritual heritage over material achievement. Then there was Methuselah, whose very name carried prophetic significance. In Hebrew, Methuselah can be translated as "his death shall bring," a prophecy of the flood that would come the very year he died. This shows how Seth's line maintained not only moral purity, but also prophetic insight through the generations. The heritage Seth built would prove to be more than just a family tradition. It would become the very channel through which God would preserve humanity through the flood. and ultimately bring forth the promised Messiah. As we examine the lasting impact of his faithful leadership, we discover principles that still resonate with those seeking to build a godly legacy in today's challenging world. Part 3. The lasting impact, Seth's legacy through time. Picture yourself standing at the dawn of human civilization, where the world was still young but already scarred by humanity's fall from grace. The air is thick with tension as two distinct paths of human destiny unfold before our eyes. On one side, the descendants of Cain have established themselves in the fertile valleys, their cities rising like monuments to human achievement. The sound of hammers striking metal echoes through the streets, while the melodies of newly invented instruments float on the evening breeze. These were the first urbanites, the pioneers of human civilization, yet their hearts grew increasingly cold to their Creator. But there was another story unfolding, one that would change the course of human history forever. In the quieter regions where the land still bore witness to Eden's memory, Seth's lineage maintained a different way of life. Picture their settlements, not grand cities, but communities where the name of the Lord was spoken with reverence, where fathers gathered their children under starlit skies to share the stories of creation, the fall, and the promise of redemption. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. While Cain's descendants built monuments to their own glory, Seth's line built altars to God. This wasn't just a difference in lifestyle, it was a fundamental divide in human purpose and destiny. Let me take you to a moment that perfectly captures the power of Seth's legacy. Enter Enoch, Seth's great-great-great-grandson. The world of Enoch's time had grown so corrupt that the very thought of walking with God seemed like a relic of the past. Yet here was a man who achieved something extraordinary. The biblical record tells us with profound simplicity, Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more, because God took him away. Genesis 5:24. Imagine the impact this event had on the community. One day, Enoch, a man known for his intimate relationship with God, simply vanished. No death, no burial, no mourning. God had taken him directly to heaven. This unprecedented event sent shockwaves through both lines of humanity. For Seth's descendants, it was a powerful confirmation of their faith. For Cain's line, it was a testimony they couldn't ignore. But the story grows even more intriguing with Methuselah, Enoch's son. His very name carried a prophetic weight that few understood at the time. In Hebrew, Methuselah means, "When he dies, it shall come." For 969 years, longer than any other human in recorded history, Methuselah's life served as a living countdown to something momentous. The ancient rabbinical writings tell us that he died just 7 days before the Great Flood began. This wasn't coincidence, it was divine choreography, showing how God worked through Seth's lineage to preserve humanity's hope. As the generations passed, the spiritual DNA of Seth's line produced increasingly remarkable individuals, none more so than Noah, who emerged as a beacon of righteousness in a world that had reached the depths of depravity. The Bible paints a stark picture of his time. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Genesis 6 verse 5. Try to imagine Noah's situation. Archaeological evidence suggests that the pre-flood world had achieved significant technological advancement. Recent discoveries in the Middle East have unearthed evidence of sophisticated metallurgy and architectural knowledge that aligns with the biblical account. Yet amid this advanced but morally bankrupt civilization, Noah dared to be different. For 120 years, he'd built an ark on dry land, facing mockery and opposition, sustained by the faith that had been passed down through Seth's line. The contrast between the two lineages reached its climax in the days before the flood. While Cain's descendants had created what we might call the world's first advanced civilization, with cities, arts, and technology, they had used these achievements to further their rebellion against God. Seth's line, though perhaps less advanced in worldly terms, had preserved something far more precious: the knowledge of God, and the promise of redemption. This spiritual heritage continued through the flood and beyond, weaving through history like a golden thread. Through Abraham, David, and eventually to a humble young woman in Nazareth named Mary, Seth's lineage carried the seed of promise. The Gospel of Luke meticulously traces Jesus' genealogy back through this line, showing how God's promise of redemption, first given in Eden, was faithfully preserved through generations of faithful men and women. Luke 3:23 through 38. But here's where the story takes an extraordinary turn, one that connects directly to our lives today. The impact of Seth's legacy didn't end with the birth of Christ. In fact, it was just beginning. Every person who has ever turned to God in faith, every family that has chosen to live for Him despite cultural pressure, every community that has preserved the truth of God's Word, all are spiritual heirs of Seth's legacy. Archaeological evidence continues to validate this narrative. Recent excavations in the Middle East have uncovered ancient settlements with distinct cultural layers, showing a clear divide between communities focused on technological advancement and those maintaining simpler, more religiously oriented lifestyles. These findings align perfectly with the biblical account of the two lineages. As we stand here today, looking back through the corridors of time at Seth's lasting impact, we face the same choice that confronted humanity in those early days. Will we pursue worldly achievement at the cost of our souls, or will we, like Seth's line, choose to preserve and pass on the knowledge of God to future generations? The story of this lasting impact reaches its crescendo not in the past, but in the present moment, where each of us has the opportunity to become part of this continuing narrative of faith. Just as Seth's influence extended far beyond his immediate family to shape the course of human history, our choices today have the power to impact generations we may never meet. But how do we translate this ancient legacy into meaningful action in our modern world? What practical steps can we take to ensure that we're building a legacy that will outlast us? Let's explore these crucial questions together. Part 4. Lessons for Today. Applying Seth's wisdom in our modern world. On a crisp autumn evening in New York City, where the relentless rhythm of urban life pulses through concrete canyons, I witnessed a scene that transported me across millennia. In Bryant Park, surrounded by towering skyscrapers and the constant hum of city life, a father and his teenage daughter sat on a wooden bench, their faces illuminated not by smartphone screens, but by something far more precious: the light of genuine connection. The father, a successful Wall Street executive, was sharing stories of faith with his daughter, their conversation punctuated by moments of thoughtful silence and eager questions. This simple yet profound moment perfectly encapsulates the challenge we face today, the same challenge Seth encountered in his time. How do we maintain authentic faith and pass on eternal truths in a world racing toward an uncertain future? Let's step back for a moment and immerse ourselves in Seth's world. Picture a landscape where human civilization was taking its first bold steps. The descendants of Cain had established themselves as pioneers of progress. Their cities were marvels of early engineering, with walls rising toward the sky and streets buzzing with activity. The air rang with the sound of metal being shaped into tools and weapons, while new forms of music filled their gathering places. These were humanity's first urbanites, the original innovators, brilliant, creative, and tragically disconnected from their creator. Archaeological discoveries in the Middle East have revealed fascinating details about this period. Recent excavations have unearthed evidence of sophisticated metallurgy workshops, musical instruments carved from bone and wood, and architectural innovations that would have seemed magical to later generations. In the layers of these ancient cities, archaeologists have found something remarkable: clear evidence of two distinct cultures existing side by side. One focused on technological advancement, the other maintaining simpler but more spiritually oriented lifestyles. This brings us to a crucial parallel with our time. Today we stand at a similar crossroads. Our technological achievements would seem like magic to previous generations. Artificial intelligence that can mimic human thought, devices that can access the sum of human knowledge in seconds, and virtual worlds that blur the line between reality and imagination. Yet, like Cain's descendants, we find ourselves grappling with a profound spiritual emptiness amid our progress. Consider the story of Michael, a Silicon Valley tech executive I met during a conference. His company was developing cutting-edge AI technology, pushing the boundaries of what's possible, but something was missing. "We can create algorithms that think," he told me, his voice heavy with realization, "but we're losing our ability to feel, to connect, to believe in something greater than our own achievements." His words could have been spoken by one of Cain's descendants, wrestling with the same fundamental human struggle. This is where Seth's example becomes powerfully relevant. In his time, Seth developed what scholars call a parallel culture, a way of living that engaged with the world's advancements while maintaining spiritual integrity. The biblical record tells us that he began to call upon the name of the Lord, Genesis 4:26. But this wasn't just about personal devotion. Seth created a community that preserved divine truth while living in a world that was rapidly forgetting it. The archaeological record provides fascinating insights into how this might have worked. Excavations have revealed evidence of communities that maintained simpler lifestyles by choice, not necessity. They had access to the same technological innovations as their urban neighbors, but chose to focus their energy on spiritual and relational development instead. Let me share a modern example that brilliantly illustrates this principle. Sarah Chen, a top-tier software developer in Seattle, felt increasingly torn between her tech career and her spiritual values. The pressure to devote every waking moment to coding, to prioritize efficiency over humanity, was intense. Drawing inspiration from Seth's example, she made a bold decision. She established what she calls tech Sabbaths, regular periods when her family completely disconnects from technology to focus on spiritual growth and human connection. It was terrifying at first, she admits, her eyes reflecting both the struggle and triumph of her decision. "Everyone said I was committing career suicide, but something remarkable happened. My team began to notice that I returned from these breaks with greater creativity and clearer perspective. Now, several of my colleagues have adopted similar practices." This brings us to our first crucial lesson from Seth. Maintaining faith in a technology-driven world requires intentional countercultural choices. Seth didn't reject the advancements of his time entirely, but he created boundaries and practices that protected his family's spiritual health. Today, this might mean establishing regular digital fasts, creating technology-free zones in our homes, or deliberately cultivating face-to-face relationships in an increasingly virtual world. The second lesson emerges from Seth's role as a transmitter of truth. Imagine the challenge he faced, teaching his children about Eden, a paradise none of them had ever seen, explaining the reality of God in a world that was increasingly skeptical of his existence. Today's parents face a remarkably similar challenge. How do we teach eternal truths to a generation raised on relativism? How do we make faith real in a virtual world? Recent archaeological discoveries have shed light on how Seth's line might have preserved their spiritual heritage. Evidence suggests they developed sophisticated memory systems, regular gathering practices, and community traditions that ensured accurate transmission of their beliefs. These weren't just stories. They were carefully preserved historical accounts, passed down with remarkable accuracy. But here's where the story takes an extraordinary turn. The impact of Seth's countercultural choices extended far beyond his immediate family. His decision to maintain spiritual integrity in a corrupt world preserved the lineage through which humanity's hope would come. Every choice he made, every time he gathered his family for worship, every truth he carefully passed on, every boundary he established, contributed to a legacy that would ultimately change the world. This brings us to the crucial question we all face: what will be the impact of our choices? Like Seth, we stand at a pivotal moment in history. The decisions we make about faith, family, and values will echo through generations. The challenges of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and an increasingly disconnected society may seem overwhelming, but Seth's example offers us a proven pathway forward. As we move toward our conclusion, let's explore specific strategies for implementing these timeless principles in our digital age. The parallels between Seth's time and ours are striking, but so are the opportunities for those willing to learn from his wisdom. The principles that guided Seth through his challenges remain powerfully relevant today. In a world that often feels as morally confused as Seth's time, his story reminds us that maintaining faith and passing it on to the next generation isn't just possible, it's essential for humanity's future. Conclusion: the continuing legacy. As we reach the culmination of Seth's extraordinary narrative, let's pause to consider a profound moment in biblical history. Picture the scene. Adam, now aged and weathered by life's hardships, gathering his family one last time. His eyes, having once gazed upon Eden's perfection, now rest on Seth, the son who carried humanity's hope. In this poignant moment, Adam shares not just the tragic story of paradise lost, but more importantly, the promise of redemption that would flow through Seth's lineage. This wasn't merely a father's final words to his son. It was the passing of a divine torch that would illuminate the path for countless generations to come. The biblical record shows us how this legacy unfolded in remarkable ways. Through Seth's line came men like Enoch, who walked so closely with God that he never saw death, and Noah, who preserved humanity through the flood. This lineage continued through Abraham, who became the father of nations, and David, the shepherd king, ultimately leading to Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of God's promise of redemption. But what makes this legacy truly extraordinary is its continuing impact today. Archaeological discoveries in the Middle East have uncovered evidence of two distinct cultural patterns in ancient settlements, one marked by technological advancement and moral decline, the other characterized by simpler living and strong family structures. These findings align perfectly with the divergent paths of Cain's and Seth's descendants. Consider the profound implications. In a world that increasingly mirrors the moral chaos of Seth's time, his story offers us a blueprint for maintaining faith and purpose. Just as Seth stood at the crossroads of human history, choosing to preserve God's truth when the world was turning away, we too stand at a crucial juncture. The choices we make today will echo through generations, just as Seth's decision to call upon the name of the Lord continues to resonate through history. The archaeological record reveals something fascinating about Seth's time, evidence of regular gatherings at specific locations, suggesting organized worship practices. These findings correlate with Genesis 4:26, which states that during Seth's time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. This wasn't just casual religious observance, it was the establishment of a pattern that would preserve God's truth through millennia. But here's where the story becomes personally challenging for each of us. Seth's legacy wasn't just about preserving religious traditions, it was about maintaining authentic faith in a world that had lost its way. Today we face similar challenges. The world around us, like in Seth's time, offers tremendous technological advancement and material comfort, yet often at the cost of spiritual vitality. The real power of Seth's story lies not in its historical significance alone, but in its ability to inspire and guide us today. Through Seth, we learn that one person's faithfulness can impact generations. Through his example, we understand that maintaining faith in a corrupt world isn't just possible, it's essential for humanity's future. As we conclude this exploration of Seth's legacy, let's consider our own role in this continuing story. Like Seth, we stand at a crucial moment in history. The question isn't whether we'll leave a legacy. We will. The question is, what kind of legacy we'll leave. Will we, like Seth, choose to be carriers of hope in our generation? Will we preserve and pass on the truth that has been entrusted to us? These aren't just rhetorical questions. They're invitations to participate in a story that's still unfolding. Your life, like Seth's, has been divinely appointed for such a time as this. You're not just a passive observer of history, you're a potential history maker. The same God who worked through Seth to preserve hope for humanity is working through faithful people today. Let's conclude with a moment of reflection and prayer, asking God to help us embrace our role in this continuing legacy of faith. Remember, every great movement of God in history began with individuals who, like Seth, chose to stand firm in their faith and pass it on to others. As we end our time together, I invite you to share in the comments below how Seth's story has impacted you. What aspects of his legacy do you want to implement in your own life? Your insights might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Closing message. As we conclude our journey through the remarkable story of Seth, let me share something powerful with you. This isn't just an ancient tale, it's a living blueprint for our lives today. Think about it. In a world that seemed beyond hope, one man's faithfulness changed the course of human history. Seth stood at the crossroads of humanity's darkest hour and chose to become a beacon of light. The lessons we've uncovered together are profound. We've seen how Seth maintained his faith in a corrupt world, how he built a legacy of righteousness that would ultimately lead to Christ, and how his example continues to inspire believers today. But perhaps the most striking lesson is this: every one of us has the potential to impact generations we'll never meet. Now, I want to challenge you with a question that has challenged me throughout my study of Seth's life. What legacy are you building today? In a world that increasingly mirrors the moral chaos of Seth's time, will you, like him, choose to stand firm in your faith? Will you be the one who preserves truth for the next generation? Your story matters. Your choices matter. Just as Seth's decision to call upon the name of the Lord echoed through millennia, your commitment to faith today could impact countless lives tomorrow. This isn't just about personal faith. It's about becoming part of a larger narrative that God is writing through history. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. How has Seth's story impacted your perspective on faith and legacy? What aspects of his life resonate most with your own journey? Your insights might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If you've found value in this exploration of Seth's life, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're committed to bringing you more in-depth studies that connect ancient biblical wisdom with modern life challenges. Hit that notification bell to ensure you don't miss our upcoming videos on other remarkable biblical figures who shaped history. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the Bible's most profound yet often overlooked stories. Remember, you're not just called to preserve faith, you're appointed to pass it on. The question isn't whether you'll leave a legacy, it's what kind of legacy you'll leave. Until our next exploration of biblical truth, keep standing firm in your faith, keep building your legacy, and keep sharing God's truth with those around you. This is Faith and Truth, reminding you that your story is part of His story. For those of you still with us, I want to share something special in our next video. We'll be diving deep into another fascinating biblical character who, like Seth, played a crucial role in preserving God's truth in challenging times. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. God bless you, and remember, your faithfulness today shapes tomorrow's legacy.